Life often feels like a series of roles we're assigned to play. For me, it was the role of a wife and mother. I wasn't unhappy, at least not in a way that demanded attention. But there was a subtle emptiness, a gap that widened with each passing year. My marriage wasn't a disaster. My husband, Robert, was a good man by all societal standards. He provided for us, he was faithful, and he was never cruel. Yet, somewhere along the way, the warmth between us had faded into a mechanical routine. Mornings were the same. He'd leave for work with a quick kiss on the cheek, barely glancing up from his phone. Dinner conversations were sparse, revolving around mundane topics that neither of us seemed fully invested in. It wasn't always like this. I remember the early days of our marriage, passionate, full of laughter and shared dreams. Back then, we couldn't wait to spend time together. Now, it felt like we were living parallel lives under the same roof, connected only by shared responsibilities. Our son, Daniel, was my anchor in ways I didn't fully realize until later. At 21, he was charming, intuitive, and empathetic beyond his years. He had this uncanny ability to notice when something was wrong, even when I thought I was doing a good job of hiding it. It was during one of those quiet moments in the kitchen when he said something that caught me off guard. "Mom, are you happy?" I paused, his words slicing through the air with an unexpected sharpness. I smiled, brushing it off with the usual motherly response. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" He looked at me with an expression that was too knowing, too mature for someone his age. "You don't seem like it." "Not really." I laughed it off, but his words lingered. That night, as I lay in bed next to Robert, who was already fast asleep, I couldn't shake the weight of Daniel's question. Was I happy? I had everything society told me I should want: a stable marriage, a wonderful son, and a comfortable home. But deep down, I knew the answer. I wasn't. It wasn't just the lack of romance in my marriage. It was the lack of feeling seen, heard, or valued. I felt invisible. My days were consumed by routines, making meals, cleaning the house, and managing everyone else's needs. Somewhere along the line, I had forgotten what it meant to feel alive, to feel wanted. One afternoon, I found myself going through old photo albums. Images of our family vacations, anniversaries, and birthdays stared back at me. In every picture, I was smiling, yet I couldn't recall the last time I genuinely felt joy. The woman in those photos seemed like a stranger, someone who once believed in love and excitement, someone who hadn't yet resigned herself to a life of quiet dissatisfaction. Daniel walked into the room and noticed the album on my lap. He sat beside me, his presence a comfort I didn't realize I needed. "You were beautiful back then," he said, glancing at a photo of me in my 30s. "Back then?" I teased, though his comment stung more than I cared to admit. "You're still beautiful, Mom," he said earnestly. "But I don't know. You looked happy in those pictures." I turned the page, avoiding his gaze. "Life changes. People change. It's normal." "Maybe," he replied. "But it doesn't mean you should stop being happy." His words stayed with me long after he left the room. They were simple, yet they struck a chord. That evening, I tried to engage Robert in conversation. I brought up the idea of going on a weekend trip, just the two of us. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Can't," he said curtly. "I've got a project deadline coming up. Maybe next month." I nodded, hiding my disappointment. This wasn't new. Every attempt to reignite the spark between us had been met with indifference. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't see the need for anything more than what we already had. The days blurred into weeks, each one feeling more monotonous than the last. But something had shifted within me. Daniel's words had planted a seed of restlessness, a longing to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried for the sake of my family. I began to notice small things. How Robert barely acknowledged me when he came home. How I avoided looking at myself in the mirror because I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to be growing closer to me in ways I hadn't anticipated. He'd ask about my day, encourage me to pursue hobbies I'd long abandoned, and remind me of the things I used to enjoy. His attention felt like a lifeline, reminder that I was still someone worthy of care and affection. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel turned to me with a serious expression. "You deserve more, Mom. You know that, right?" I didn't respond immediately. The lump in my throat made it hard to speak. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," he said softly. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself." His words felt like both a comfort and a challenge. For years, I had convinced myself that my sacrifices were a necessary part of being a good wife and mother. But now I wasn't so sure. Was it selfish to want more? To want to feel alive again? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Daniel's concern, his unwavering belief in my worth, had awakened something in me. It wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about rediscovering who I was beneath the layers of duty and routine. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life that was mine, a life where I wasn't just a wife or a mother, but a woman with dreams, desires, and a longing to feel seen. I wasn't prepared for the conversation that would follow. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us in the living room. Daniel looked thoughtful, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a serious expression. He turned to me, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Mom, I want to talk to you about something," he said. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he began, his voice calm but intense. "I see how hard you work, how much you've sacrificed for this family. But I also see how unhappy you are, even if you don't want to admit it." His words left me momentarily speechless. I wasn't sure where he was going with this, but I could sense the weight behind them. "You deserve more than this," he continued. "You've spent your whole life putting others first, but who's putting you first?" I tried to brush it off, my instinctive response to downplay my feelings kicking in. "I'm fine, Daniel. Really. It's just life, ups and downs. Nothing unusual." But he didn't let it go.
"Mom, it's not fine."
"I see it in your eyes, in how you carry yourself. You're just going through the motions, and that's not what you deserve." His words struck a nerve, and I felt a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew he was right. "What do you want me to do, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "I want you to think about yourself for once. Do something that makes you happy. Rediscover who you are." I was taken aback. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that?"
"Start small," he said.
"It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. Just stop thinking about what everyone else needs all the time. Think about what you need." His words were simple, but they carried a profound weight. For years, I had been so focused on my roles as a wife and mother that I hadn't even considered what I needed. It felt almost foreign, the idea of prioritizing myself. "You make it sound so easy," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "It's not," he admitted. "But you've got to start somewhere. And I'm here for you, Mom. Whatever you need, I'll support you." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen, like someone understood the struggles I had been quietly enduring. It was a strange and bittersweet feeling, a mix of gratitude and sadness. As the days passed, Daniel's words stayed with me. I found myself reflecting on them constantly, questioning everything I had accepted as normal for so long. It was as though he had planted a seed in my mind, one that was slowly growing and taking root. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Daniel spoke again. This time, his tone was lighter, but the meaning behind his words was just as significant. "You know, Mom, you used to have this spark about you," he said. "I remember when I was a kid, you'd laugh so easily, like everything in the world could bring you joy. I miss that version of you." I smiled faintly, though his words stirred something painful within me. "That version of me feels like a lifetime ago." "It doesn't have to be," he replied. "You're still that person deep down. You just need to find her again." His unwavering belief in me was both comforting and unsettling. It forced me to confront the parts of myself I had buried, the dreams and desires I had pushed aside for the sake of my family. But what truly caught me off guard was how much I valued his opinion. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, the way he looked at me like I was someone worth fighting for. Over the next few weeks, our conversations grew deeper, more intimate. He'd ask about my past, about the things I used to love before life became so complicated. He encouraged me to try new things, to step out of my comfort zone. And slowly, I began to see myself through his eyes, not as a tired, unfulfilled wife and mother, but as a woman with potential, with a life still waiting to be lived. But with that newfound awareness came confusion. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the moments we shared. His presence filled a void I hadn't even realized was there. It was comforting, but it was also unsettling. One night, as we sat on the porch talking, he reached out and gently touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a wave of emotion through me. "You're stronger than you think, Mom," he said softly. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see myself the way he saw me. But as much as his words uplifted me, they also left me feeling conflicted. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I was a woman rediscovering herself. And that realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The days began to feel different, though I couldn't entirely explain why. There was an unspoken shift in the air, a quiet tension that wasn't uncomfortable but undeniable. I started to notice small details I hadn't paid attention to before. The way Daniel's eyes lingered on me during our conversations, the subtle warmth in his voice when he said my name. It wasn't something I allowed myself to dwell on. I convinced myself that I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into moments that held no real significance. But even as I tried to brush it off, a part of me couldn't ignore the way my heart reacted, the way my pulse quickened in ways it hadn't in years. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen after dinner, Daniel brought up a memory from his childhood. "Do you remember that time we got caught in the rain at the park? You laughed so hard when I slipped in the mud." I chuckled. The memory is vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "You were so upset. You refused to let me take a picture of you covered in dirt. You always found a way to make things fun," he said, his voice soft. Even when things didn't go as planned. I missed that. There was a sincerity in his tone that made my chest tighten. I looked at him, the playful boy I had raised, now a man sitting across from me, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. "Life has a way of changing us," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "Maybe," he replied. "But it doesn't mean we can't find our way back." His words lingered long after he left the room. They stirred something in me, a quiet longing I had suppressed for years. It wasn't just about my marriage or the routine of my life. It was about feeling alive, about being seen and valued in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. The next morning, as I went about my usual chores, I found myself thinking about Daniel more than I should have. His kindness, his attentiveness, the way he seemed to understand me better than anyone else, it was both comforting and disorienting. I chastised myself for the thoughts that crept into my mind, for the way I was beginning to look forward to our moments together a little too much. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the connection between us felt undeniable. It wasn't something I sought out or encouraged. It was just there, growing in the quiet spaces between our words, in the way he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, worth caring for. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he asked me to sit with him for a while. "You work too hard," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "I'm fine," I replied, though I couldn't deny the relief of taking a moment to rest. He sat across from me, his eyes searching mine. "You know, you don't always have to be the strong one. It's okay to let someone else take care of you for a change." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I looked away, trying to mask the emotions bubbling to the surface. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to," he said softly. "I'm here, Mom. Always." The way he said it, the way he looked at me in that moment, it was as though the world had shifted beneath my feet. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, but also confusion. How had we arrived at this point? How had I allowed myself to feel so deeply, so vulnerably? Over the next few days, I tried to put some distance between us. I told myself it was for the best, that I needed to focus on my marriage, on my family, on anything but the growing bond between Daniel and me. But it was easier said than done. Every time he walked into the room, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. His presence was magnetic, comforting in a way I hadn't experienced in years. And no matter how hard I tried to suppress it, the truth was undeniable. I was drawn to him, not just as my son, but as someone who saw me, who valued me in ways I hadn't felt in decades. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I knew the boundaries of our relationship, the lines that could never be crossed. But I also knew that what I felt wasn't something I could simply will away. It was there, as real and tangible as the air between us. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, he turned to me and said, "You deserve to be happy, Mom. Whatever that looks like for you, I'll support it." His words were both a comfort and a challenge. They forced me to confront the parts of myself I had buried, the desires I had long ignored. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to wonder, what if happiness wasn't something I had to sacrifice for the sake of others? What if it was something I could still claim for myself? The days that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. I had always prided myself on being in control, on knowing my place in the world and fulfilling my responsibilities. But now, everything felt unsteady, as if the foundation of my life had shifted beneath me. Daniel's presence became both a source of comfort and a constant reminder of my inner turmoil. He was attentive, kind, and understanding in ways I hadn't realized I needed. His words lingered in my mind, replaying at unexpected moments, making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I found myself reflecting on my marriage. The years had worn us down, my husband and me, turning what was once a passionate connection into something routine and stagnant. We didn't fight, but we didn't connect either. We existed in parallel, sharing a home but rarely sharing our thoughts or feelings. It wasn't that I didn't care for him, I did. But the love we once shared felt like a distant memory, buried beneath years of responsibilities, disappointments, and unspoken resentment. I had convinced myself that this was normal, that this was what marriage became after so many years. But Daniel's words had awakened something in me, a longing for more. I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel seen, the way he reminded me of the woman I used to be. It wasn't just about the attention, it was about the way he listened, the way he understood me without judgment or expectation. It was a connection I hadn't felt in so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself torn between my responsibilities and my desires. I tried to throw myself into my routine, hoping that the familiarity of my daily tasks would ground me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feelings that had taken root. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, Daniel knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and sat down on the edge of the bed. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice calm but earnest. "About how things have changed between us." I felt my breath catch, the weight of his words settling over me. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he continued, "but I can't pretend that nothing's changed. I feel it, and I think you do too." His honesty left me speechless. I had been so focused on hiding my feelings, on convincing myself that they weren't real, that I hadn't considered the possibility that he might feel the same way. "Daniel," I began, my voice faltering. "This is complicated." "I know," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "And I don't want to make things harder for you. But I can't ignore how I feel, and I don't think you can either." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt a wave of emotions, fear, confusion, longing, all crashing over me at once. "This isn't something we can act on," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not right." "I'm not asking for anything," he replied gently. "I just need you to know how much you mean to me, how much I care about you." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I looked away, unable to face the intensity of his gaze. "You're my son," I whispered. "And you're my mom," he said. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're also a person, someone who deserves to be happy, who deserves to be loved. His words cut through me, exposing the vulnerability I had worked so hard to hide. For so long, I had convinced myself that my happiness didn't matter, that my role as a wife and mother came first. But now, faced with Daniel's unwavering belief in me, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said, his tone reassuring. "Just know that I'm here for you, no matter what." As he left the room, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. His words had given me permission to feel, to acknowledge the parts of myself I had buried for so long. But they had also opened the door to questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions. I thought about my marriage, about the life I had built, and the sacrifices I had made. I thought about Daniel, about the connection we shared, and the feelings I couldn't deny. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to wonder, what if I could have more? What if happiness wasn't just a distant dream, but something I could reach for, something I deserved? The path ahead felt uncertain, filled with challenges and choices I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But one thing was clear, my life could no longer remain the same. The questions Daniel had raised, the emotions he had awakened, had changed me in ways I couldn't ignore. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it with honesty, with courage, and with the hope that, somehow, I could find my way back to the woman I used to be, the woman I still was, deep down.